You, and I am elated to have my book published. I've worked on it for 3 or 4 years. It took a long, long time. I had the help of many people, especially Yasmina Mock is my agent, but there's so many other people, even these Cossack warriors here at the Maidan in 2014. I don't know if you can see that, but so many people were the inspiration for my book. I came the first time way back in 2007, before any of this happened, and I wrote some poems, and then I didn't come back again until 2013. And in 2013, I had one day in Kiev, and I asked at the hotel, what shall I see? And they said, well, you have to see the Maidan. And I said, well, what's the Maidan? And they said, it's the most beautiful square in the world. So I went there, and I thought, this is not only the most beautiful square, but it has a vibration. There's a feeling that emanates from Maidan because it's the epicenter of everything Ukrainian, I think, even in the world, is the Maidan. So on that day in October of 2013, there was a demonstration against Viktor Yanukovych. And I had heard about the Orange Revolution in 2004, and that this guy was a big cheater and he was a fraud. And so I joined, and I asked the protesters, tell me more about this. And they said that, first of all, Yanukovych had stolen billions of dollars of the Ukrainian taxpayers' money, and that he had run on a campaign promise to sign an agreement with the European Union. And of course, Ukraine is trying to integrate into the European Union and NATO, which we want you but to be part of the West. Because there is a respect for human rights in the West, much more, and we make mistakes too, but we also have rule of law, we have democracy, we have due process of law, and for the most part it's taken very seriously in Britain or France or Belgium or Canada or America. So I told these guys, if everything you say is true, I'll go back to America now and I'll check online. And I've actually read 15 books about Ukraine since then.
15 books?
15, yes.
In English?
In English, yes.
You are the ex-teacher of the history, so
yeah.
You was very interested in Ukrainian stories.
Right. Yeah, and I'm interested in all history, and also for a short while I was an English teacher, which explains the poetry part. So there's lots of history in my poetry, and politics and even geography are all very important themes in my poetry. Well, I was back in America in 2013, and I saw this movement in Ukraine get bigger and bigger, and it was called Euromaidan, and it was so exciting, actually, to everyone in America. Is they're having a real protest movement in Ukraine, and Americans love to protest. We have freedom of speech, and what. Some of the major themes in American history and culture are what we call the First Amendment, as freedom of speech, religion, assembly, press, the media, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And if I would say there's one thing that's most important in American culture, it's that. We call it the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So Americans protest a lot. In fact,
and you was the protester when the Vietnam War started, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Yeah?
Yes. I'm not in favor of communism. I'm against communism, but we thought that the United States had no right to go to Vietnam and kill. We killed 2 or 3 million people, and we used terrible chemical warfare like napalm and Agent Orange, and so the young people in America were horrified. And also, we're highly moral people. Even if our government is doing wrong, we will go in the streets and protest. So I was one of the leaders in that protest movement, and I got arrested 13 times.
Oh,
Okay, but in America, if
but
you get...
what is the reason? You is in a free country in America, in the USA, and you was arrested. Why?
It's partly we have corruption too.
Yeah?
The police were told arrest the leaders, and it was for very small charges like disturbing the peace or disrupting an assembly, things that were very vague and I mean, it wasn't nice, and I must say America's not perfect, right? At my university, Kent State, they killed protesters against the war in Vietnam.
Kill them.
Killed them. They brought in the army and shot them dead. So I don't want to have any illusions that America's perfect, but we are so much better than Russia or China or any of the authoritarian states.
And, South Korea, probably.
South Korea, or North Korea.
North Korea, sorry.
Right, or Pol Pot in Cambodia. And we've done bad things like we stole all the land from the Indians, from the natives, and we made the Africans slaves. But we admit we did it. We make movies about it. We write books about it, songs, poetry. It's on television all the time about how bad we are. Americans are always saying how bad we are. Russian, you will never find a Russian to say, oh, it was horrible that Stalin starved to death 10 million Ukrainians, right, in the Holodomor. So America's a very open society, and you know, no society can be perfect. Okay, so it's now
Back to Ukraine.
Back to Ukraine. It's now January of 2014, and Euromaidan is escalating, and also the tactics of Yanukovych are escalating, and he begins to take away your rights, and so the protesters increase their protest. And now I didn't know this part before, but some of the protesters were actually killed before February. And actually, it's not just at the Maidan, it's all over Kyiv. You will find monuments to dead protesters. But what really hit me was, it was February 18th, 2014, and I'm just watching television in America, and all of a sudden, I see them, snipers, picking off protesters in the streets from the rooftops. And I've never seen anything or even heard of anything that horrifying. And they were aiming for the heart and the lungs, and they killed on the first day, I don't know, 30 or 40, and then February 19th, they killed 30 or 40 more, and February 20th, they killed 50. Actually, altogether, it's not just the Heavenly 100, it's the Heavenly 130, maybe 200 were actually killed by Viktor Yanukovych's police called the Berkut.
By the way, the cases about the killed protesters didn't go to the jail, but there any decision against the person who killed them. Do you, what is your feeling? It will be some real information about these cases or not?
Well, at my university, when the students were killed by the military didn't go to jail either. I went to jail. They actually put the victims in jail. So, you know, we have to realize that, you know, life is unfair. It's just a matter of degrees. And I think Western culture, starting with the French Enlightenment, these ideas of justice, people have rights, began to blossom in the Western societies. And you should have freedom of religion and be able to write what you want to write and publish it. And this has never existed in Russia, as I said before, China, and other autocratic states. So what was your question?
My question is, do you believe that the truth will be published by judge, by authorities, because now we can have the situation when some politicians talk vice versa stories that protesters will start to kill all police and militants and other ways, so they changed it upside down the information, and we have tried to have another history fact.
Mm-hmm. I understand. Я понимаю. It is, well, they must identify and prosecute the police who killed the protesters. And my understanding is they know who killed whom, right? They actually can discern that. Unfortunately, because you do have so much corruption in your government, that has not happened. And as far as the protesters getting revenge, well, these murders on the part of Yanukovych's pro-Russian police should be in prison. Now, maybe other prisoners will attack them and hurt them or kill them. I don't know, but that's the way it is. You know, that they killed protesters willfully, and they must accept some kind of consequences. I don't think that they should be attacked or killed, but I think they should spend the rest of their lives in prison.
But what was your reaction when you know that Zelensky became the Ukrainian president?
Well, I depended on my friends here in Ukraine. I was back in America during the election. Everyone in America was really shocked. The only thing is, we just had a president elected, the first president in our history, Donald Trump, that had no experience in politics.
And he's business, huge experience.
Yeah, business, right? And he's terrible. He's terrible. He's totally incompetent. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's a pathological liar. He's a racist. He's a misogynist. I mean, like he looks down on women. And now, I don't think Zelensky is all those things, but Trump simply doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't even understand our Constitution and how our system. He doesn't understand how our system works. Really.
So he break the law as Zelensky started to do as the same, yeah?
Right. Well, Zelensky, I just read, appointed his top assistant to be is it Kolomoisky? One of the oligarchs' lawyers. And so I'm very worried that Zelensky might be sort of just a fake, that he appears to be the servant of the people, right? And I know he's a very funny and very appealing person, but that doesn't necessarily make a good president. He has to be clear that he's 100% on the side of Ukraine and 100% against Vladimir Putin and Russia. And it must be clear, and it cannot be vague or nebulous. Like he said, he wants to end the war in Donbass. Okay, that's his number one priority. Well, what does that mean? That means you give Donbass to the Russians, you give Crimea to the Russians? That's not acceptable to me, and I don't think to most Ukrainians.
And what do you think about the federative, that referendum about the federalization?
The referendum in Crimea? Or?
Not about Crimea, it's about Donbass now. Because Zelensky advancers say some ideas like that. We need to have referendum because it is democracy, let's say, about the federalization of Ukraine and that part of Donbass back to Ukraine, but as a federative state.
Well, I think they can have semi-autonomy. In the United States, we have 50 states. I'm from Ohio. Every state has semi-autonomy. All 50 do. But we're very clear that we're under the federal government in Washington, D.C. And most Americans respect our government. and it's called the federal system, and so the power is divided between Washington and each state, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and so on. So, I mean, that's okay, but then how could Russia advocate democracy in Donbass when they don't have it in Russia? Listen to that. And, Putin, is basically, there's one party. He's been president for 20 years almost. That's way too much time. Power begets more power. And these leaders, in America, it's 2 terms for 8 years, and then you must go. Even George Washington, they offered for him to be the king of America, King George. And he said, no, I go home now. And especially at that time in history, in the late 18th century, almost all the rulers were absolute monarchs. But George Washington was a hell of a man to say, sorry, I'm not president anymore. I'm not your leader anymore. I go home now. I don't know how Russia can advocate democracy anywhere when they have not allowed it. I mean, the Romanovs didn't allow it, the Tsars, the Bolsheviks didn't allow it, Stalin didn't allow it. A little bit under Gorbachev and the early years of Yeltsin, and then Yeltsin became very corrupt also.
Yeah, completely agree. But what about democracy? Now we have a situation when everyone say, okay, we have democratic elections, and that's why Zelensky was elected, but he is completely unprofessional. He didn't know anything about the laws, about the constitution, and other aids. So, what is democracy for you? What is the real democracy?
Well, democracy is...
Democracy, is it, sorry for interrupting
Oh,
you,
sure.
Is it about to give voice for every person who will be led by some stupid advertisement, by the good slogans, good sound bites, and other.
Yes. Well, democracy comes from the Greek word "rule by the people," okay, and that's what it means. Now, obviously, that's more complicated than you might think. First of all, there's many different kinds of democracy around the world. We have the presidential system in the U.S. You have a parliamentary system, I believe, and Britain has parliamentary, but it's different than yours. And so I think each country has to develop their own style of democracy. But I think almost the whole world wants democracy, unless you're brainwashed, as people are in China and North Korea and Russia, because they only have one source of news in Russia, the state channels. So of course they believe what they're told. As Hitler and Goebbels said, if you're going to lie, tell a big lie and tell it over and over again, and people will believe it.
So back to your story. Then the next time you came to Ukraine when the war started, and you came to inside the war region with the Warsaw. Yeah, talk about that.
Okay, well, after the massacres, and one of the reasons the massacres upset me so much is because I told you I went through a massacre as a young man, and it re-stimulated that emotionally and psychologically. I can't stand the thought and the sight of people being killed for protesting, right? And of course this happened many other times at Tiananmen Square in China, at Tahrir Square in Cairo, Egypt, and so on. I was in a state of upset and anxiety, and I really felt like I was going crazy because I'd been to Ukraine twice, and there was something about this country that I really loved and was so special. I've been to 66 countries in my life. I've lived in 5. So for me to say Ukraine is my favorite is really high praise, and for a worthy country. And so I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and in my city we have many Ukrainians. So we have actually a district where they live, and I drove my car. It's called Ukrainian Village, actually. Come visit. Cleveland's also the place where rock and roll started, so, you know, Cleveland rocks. I just knocked on doors and said, I know what's happening in Ukraine. I'm a high school teacher from Cleveland. What can I do to help? And finally they sent me to the Maidan Committee of Cleveland, and there were the Ukrainians in Cleveland. Mostly they're immigrants, and there's about 50,000, and they said, would you like to be an international election observer? So I said, oh yes, or talk, and I went to Ukraine in May of 2014 and was an election observer. And Kyiv and the rest of Ukraine was probably the most exciting place on earth then, because people still were living in tents all over the streets. There was demonstrations every day of thousands of people. There was a big stage with speakers and Ukrainian folk music, and so on. Well, so I observed the election, and it looked like it was so honest. And in America, even our elections aren't necessarily honest. You know, Hillary Clinton got 3 more million votes than Trump.
But you have the absolutely different system of elections
It's cuckoo. Yeah. It's state by state. Let's take the state of Kentucky. If you win Kentucky by 1 vote, you get all of its votes, right? If you lose the state of Iowa by 5 votes, you don't get any. You know, out of 2 million people that voted in Iowa, you don't get any of the electors, they're called. So it's a very bad system, and otherwise Hillary Clinton would be president, and I guarantee you she would be helping Ukraine. Anyway, I went back to America, and I decided to return to Ukraine in October of 2014, also to work as an election observer. And in that summer, of course, is when the Russian terrorists shot down the jetliner and killed all 298 people, and also Russia full-out invaded Ukraine when you were on the verge of victory, and Putin sent in the Russian army, and of course they've now killed 13,000 Ukrainians in Donbass. So the whole world was watching Ukraine. You were the most important country in the world in that year. I met some Ukrainian guys in Cleveland that were from Ukraine, and they were movie makers, and they gave me their card. And when I returned in October of 2014, I stayed for 4 months, and I found their card in my wallet, and I called them. They came to my hotel to visit me, and they said, we'd like to use you to be a star of a movie about Ukraine.
So
right.
you get it as a movie and start making a documentary.
Yeah, the documentary. I'm one of the narrators. It's called Ukraine Path to Freedom. It's by Golden Gate Productions. And my good friend George Sayevich is the other narrator. And it's made by Olis Chernyuk. George Sayevich, I want to say, was also wounded at the Maidan and by the Berkut. And most people don't know this, but over 1,000 people were wounded, and 30 of the protesters just disappeared. They don't know what happened to them. Now, if any American knew that, they would be so horrified. And after the Kent State killings, we had millions of people in the streets, and that was almost 50 years ago, and everyone still remembers that America did this bad thing at Kent State. But in Ukraine, that's normal. Your whole history has been one of foreign invasion and oppression, you know, going back to the Mongol horde and the Ottoman Turks, the Polish. The Nazis killed 9 million Ukrainians. Americans can't even conceive of something like that. We lost 322,000 in World War II. You lost 9 million at least. Of course, the Russians starved you to death 3 times, not just once, but 1922-23, and then 32-33 in 1947, for, you know, a total of about 10 million people.
I'm very interested in your opinion about why so many young Russians support Stalinism and Stalin now, and communism.
Yeah. Well,
What do you think? They back to the situation, they supported the USSR and other something.
I have some news for you. Some Americans support Stalin too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a very, very small percentage. But I actually know people that are Stalinists, and it's I don't know what to say. To me, Stalin was Hitler's evil twin. I mean, the only difference is Hitler started World War II and Stalin did not. But Stalin killed his own people, and he probably killed a lot more people than Hitler, right? Including the Holocaust against the Jews, because he had the Great Purge. And now get this, in 1937-38, Russia was executing 1,500 people a day for 2 straight years. And what did all these people have in common? They were all communists. They were members of the Communist Party. They were part of that, you know, 1% of elite people. And, you know, Stalin wanted to exterminate them all so that people would only think of him as the leader. And so what do I think? I hate to say, I'm going to take a stand here. I think that the Russians are very weak people. I went to Russia, and people there told me 2 things that shocked me. One is, we don't want democracy. We're not interested.
They want a king, like...
Right, well, a czar, we want our empire back. Now, that'd be like the British saying, oh, we want India and Australia and Canada back in the British Empire, right? I mean, you know, the British did terrible things when they conquered the world, but that was, that ended in 1945. Russia still wants to build an empire, and, you know, Putin said the biggest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Now, wait a minute, what about World War I? What about World War II?
My name is Alexei, thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay.
Dollars, кушать, dollars, гривна.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we
We're busy,
We
sorry.
are very busy, sorry.
Купить, я хочу покушать.
Good luck.
Back,
Bye-bye.
back, bye-bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Cheers.
Ребята, по-русски понимаете?
Sorry.
Вот здесь гривен 20.
Okay. So, and the third thing that disturbed me, I was in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and I asked people, who's your greatest leader? You know, Gorbachev? Most Americans would think Gorbachev, because he reformed communism with glasnost. Khrushchev? No. Oh, Lenin? Is that right? No, not Lenin. Yeltsin? No. I said, who? They said, Joseph Stalin. Stalin was our greatest leader. And if you went to Germany, and I used to live in Germany, you might meet a few people, like 0.5% who would say Hitler was our greatest leader, but almost nobody.
Because they have plenty of museums against the situation that Hitler done, against the murders of Hitler. They have a lot of every day they talk that other Germans don't do that again. Yeah.
Right. And the Germans, since 1945, have behaved extremely well as a country. They're ultra-democratic. And Russia, since 1991, when USSR broke apart, has done nothing to apologize, to pay reparations, to rectify the situation, or in any way admit that they committed these horrors. And I recently read a book called Darkness at Noon by Arthur Kessler, and I really recommend it. It's just about one man who had been a Communist Party leader, and then the Communist Party turned against so many other communists and put them in prison, and they kept them awake for 3, 4, 5 days until they would sign a confession. Right? Then they would send them on trial, and there was called telephone justice, and the judge would call the Politburo. Well, what should I do? Convict them, and then what? You know what to do. So they would convict Kaganov, for example, and in America, if you're convicted and it's a capital crime and you're going to be executed, you go on death row. And this is what's better about America than any communist country. You might stay on death row for 20 years, right? And there's many appeals, and you might get executed, and you might not, okay? But in Russia, in the Soviet Union, you were convicted, and then 10 minutes later, you were dead. I mean, they would take you into the basement of Lubyanka prison, and they would just shoot 2 bullets through the back of your head. There was no appeals. There was no death row. So I don't know. It's almost weird that the Russian people, especially the young people, would idolize Joseph Stalin. But it is deliberate, right? Vladimir Putin is actively enhancing the image of Stalin, of Felix Dzerzhinsky, and he's the founder of what became the KGB, and he's responsible for torturing tens and tens of thousands of people in the most sadistic, cruel ways possible. I mean, I just give one example. This is what the Bolsheviks did. Okay, if they caught one of their opponents, which would very often be a Ukrainian, or it might just be a Democrat, right? And they tie them to a board and feed them into a fire slowly, right? Or they tie them to a board and feed them into a furnace slowly. Now, that is beyond belief. You know, that I guess if you're going to execute somebody, you want to do it fast and as painlessly as possible. But they were definitely, and this is right after the Bolshevik coup d'etat in 1917, that Dzerzhinsky began to employ these tactics. Right now, his image is being elevated in Russia, and they have portraits of him, and they have statues of him. And when I went to Russia, I couldn't believe this. They had all these pictures of Vladimir Lenin everywhere, as if it were, 1918 or something, right after the revolution. And, Lenin is the one who turned it into a dictatorship, not Stalin. It was already a dictatorship. And Lenin canceled the Soviets, that was the whole idea, is the workers were supposed to have power. But Lenin canceled that. He outlawed all the political parties. And the people that actually overthrew the Tsar, the Social Democrats, the Mensheviks, the Social Revolutionaries, were all arrested at the Duma. And Lenin sent them to not just Siberia, the Arctic Circle. And now, people in the West don't even know this stuff happened. Right? They know, there was a Bolshevik revolution. Well, first of all, that's a lie. The Bolsheviks did not have a revolution. They had a coup d'etat. It was Alexander Kerensky and the Social Democrats that had the revolution in March of 1917, and they overthrew the Tsar. The Bolsheviks had nothing to do with overthrowing the Tsar, which was the most important thing.
But now Ukrainians have some through other persons say them, okay, support us back to the friendship with Russia, and you will have stability, good economic situation, and others. Do you think that Ukrainian, the biggest person from Ukraine, supported the idea about the, how we say, refrigerator, good salary and other else, and have no democracy and be with Russia, or the most of Ukrainians say no and go back to friendship with Russia?
So most Ukrainians are against alliance with Russia, right? But some are in favor. I think especially some of the oligarchs, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, of course, the oligarchs see business opportunities because Russia has so many natural resources in the world. I think they're first or second in natural resources. Of course, that's appealing. I mean, anybody would like to make more money than they're making, right? That's probably universal. It's well, for one thing, it's just going backwards, and your whole history for 400 years, Russia has invaded and conquered, made your language illegal. Catherine the Great made Ukrainian illegal. In the 1930s, you could be shot dead on the streets of Kharkiv or Lviv for speaking Ukrainian. Right? That's how severe and dastardly Russia is. I mean, do you want to go back to that? So I think people have to be patient. It's going to take time. And politically, I hope two things happen. Number one is that Zelensky does the right thing, and we just don't know yet. And number two, that Donald Trump is thrown out of office in America, because he is not the friend of Ukraine, he's a friend of Putin, right? Trump loves dictators, right? He like Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He said what a great guy he is. And Trump even in Helsinki in 2018 said, he looked at Putin and said, I agree with Putin about the Russians interfering in our election, right? And I don't agree with our own CIA and FBI. And that was treason. That was treason, to take the side of our enemy. And most American people regard Russia as our enemy, and we always have. That's at least one hope for you, that the vast majority of Americans are on your side and have always been against Russia. Even Tsarism, because...
But in Ukraine, we say that Ukraine is a coin between Russia and the USA because of our natural resources and our geography, place, and other elements. Is it not true?
You mean that we're...
I talk about the influence, that who will have most influence, the USA or Russia in Ukraine?
Unfortunately, I don't think the USA cares that much. I mean, the people do. The people, if they took a poll in America, 80% would say, I support Ukraine. Okay, but the politicians, they just want Ukraine. Okay, I'm a Democrat, right? And my party, we're all for 100% for Ukraine. But they would say, we just want Ukraine to have democracy. And if they want to join the West, we want them and we will help them. But we're not going to, be sneaky or surreptitious about it. We simply welcome them to be part of the European Union and NATO and part of Western democracy. I don't think we would ever send soldiers here. We have sent some weapons, and we should send more. And if a Democrat wins next year in the election, I think there'll be a lot more weapons sent to Ukraine.
And special mission in the bus?
I would be in favor of that, but I don't have any more chance of being elected a president than a comedian on a TV show. Whoops, it happened, didn't it?
Anyone can't imagine that.
Yeah, right. So maybe I should run for president. But I told someone in Cleveland, I said, here's my politics. I'm pro-Ukrainian. That's it. I'm just pro-Ukrainian. I have my other political beliefs too, I think that I don't think that the West sees Ukraine as a soccer ball being kicked back and forth between Russia and the West. The West has too many of its own problems. Just all the refugees coming into Europe and all the right-wing parties, far-right parties. And who's supporting these far-right parties? Russia is. Vladimir Putin. The Alternative for Deutschland, supported by Putin. The National Front in France, supported by Putin. Brexit, supported by Putin. The Republican Party in the United States, supported by Putin. And that's Trump's party, and Trump's party gladly took help from the Russians. Now, they didn't break any laws doing that, so we couldn't, put them in jail for it. But some of Trump's assistants are now in prison, right now, including Paul Manafort. And Paul Manafort was not only Trump's campaign manager, he was Viktor Yanukovych's campaign manager.
Yeah, but do you know the story about that Rodolfo Giuliani, that law of Trump, saying that he is accused of some person connected with Kolomoisky, that they wanted to kill some the USA businessman. So she makes some interesting game.
Is this the Russian woman who is a spy in the United States, and she's now in prison? We have a Russian spy in our prison right now. And it's a 30-year-old woman. Yeah, I know about her. She was trying to infiltrate the Republican Party, and she did, but she got caught, and so now they're not sending her to prison very long. I think it's about 1 year. But I do want to cite this too. I think I have a sticker here. Can everyone see this? It says 98. Right, and maybe we could just mention this, is right now, speaking of freedom of the press and democracy, 98 Ukrainian journalists are in prison in Russia for just writing criticism of Russia and Putin. 98. And of course, tell me the name of the most famous one that went on the fast.
Do you mean Alexei Sov?
Yes, right, yeah. Okay.
He's a filmmaker, Ukrainian filmmaker.
And he was living in Crimea.
Yeah.
That's right. And the Russians came and kidnapped him. They kidnapped him. And also what people don't know is right now in Crimea, the Russian police go through your house, and if they find a Ukrainian flag, you're arrested and put in jail just for having a Ukrainian flag. And of course, Russia has captured three Ukrainian naval ships and 24 sailors, and they're in jail. So these things continue to happen, and Americans and the British and the Spanish and the Italians and all the people in the West and the rest of the world, Africa, South America, Asia, need to know this. That it's, and also this dictator of North Korea that Trump likes so much, Kim Jong-un, he starved to death 1 million of his own people in the 1990s. I mean, that's very, very recent. Certainly it's almost like we're in the 1930s again, and it's the rise of dictators, Mussolini in Italy, Franco in Spain, Stalin in the Soviet Union, Hitler in Germany, Tojo in Japan, and we're going through, history is a cycle, and we're going through the cycle again, except now we have nuclear weapons, and it could be, really, really, it could be horrifying. Now I want to tell about my experiences in Ukraine a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay, and why did I come to write this book, which I hope you'll buy. By the way, if you want to...
What is the most likely poetry? Can you text it?
Read one, you mean? Sure. Oh, okay. Well, the name of the book is Ukrainian Heart. Again, my name is Bill Артелл. I'm just a regular guy from the Midwest, and a retired high school teacher from Cleveland. Well, here's one thing you can do to order a book. It's very simple. Is send me an email, and this is for Ukrainian people, at Arthrell, ARTHRELL at MSN.com. And if you send your address, I guess the post, you can go pick up a book
So
at the
there are
post.
no distribution in Ukrainian stores?
Not yet. I mean, the book just came out 3 days ago, so I'm very excited about it. Or maybe even easier is to just make friends with me on Facebook. So it's Bill, it's my first name, B-I-L-L. And I told you how easy American names are. They're so short. And then Arthrell, A-R-T-H-R-E-L-L. And if you make friends on Facebook, send me a message and with your address, and then we will notify the post, and then you go pick up the book at the post. That's what my agent Yasmina Mock said. So, and then the post will pay us the money. So, does that sound accurate? Okay. Anyway.
Oh, let's read.
Okay. So, well, first of all, let me say that there's 33 poems in this book because it's a lucky number, right? And one is at the beginning, and the same one is at the end. And the first half of the book I call Nation of Survivors, and that's just about my experiences in Ukraine and my adventures, my observations. So the second half of the book is called A Nation, the first half is A Nation of Poets, the second half is A Nation of Survivors. And that's about your history, your politics, the Maidan Revolution, the war with Russia, even Chernobyl, and so on. So here's St. Michael's Cathedral, and this was published by Ukrainian Educational Publishers, and you can look them up online and order a book. But I'll read one poem. I will read a poem now?
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Okay. Now this is right after I was in the demonstration in 2013, and I was taking the bus right before. I was taking the bus from Odessa to Kyiv. And so I was looking out the bus window at your beautiful, beautiful farmland. So just called Ukraine. Ukraine. I've never seen farms so large, so much bigger than dreams. Vast sky of wheat, rye, the rapid gallop to the horizon, where eternity begins.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
I can imagine this picture when you describe it.
Yeah, Ukraine is like eternity to me. When I look at the sky, and especially when you're in the farmland, in the countryside, looks like it's not only eternity, but this is where eternity begins, right? It begins here, and then it goes on, forever. So let's find another one. Okay, this is a real short one. Now, I write different styles of poetry. One style is called minimalist, right, where you see, you make the very shortest poem, and you try to get your ideas stated really, really quickly. So this one is called Evening in Lviv. Evening roaming through the leaves. In September, I implore the sun to drift into darkness. It's real simple, but it's really the picture I get of Lviv in September. That the weather's starting to change, and so implore means I ask the sun to drift into darkness. So I'm calling for the autumn to come, and later the winter. Okay, let's.
Do you have poetry about the USA or only about Ukraine?
Oh no, I have hundreds of poems about the United States. I just and one thing I can't do is memorize my own poems, so I can't recite any. But I do have one other book. It's about Cleveland, my city, and it's called Heart's Cargo, Poetry of Cleveland by Bill Артелл. And if you also send me a message on Messenger or send it to my email, I'll send you a copy of that too. Now, let's see, let's make a price. Okay, 90 hryvnia for either book. So people send 90 hryvnia, and I'll send the shipping will be free. Okay. I wish I could think of a poem, but okay. Let me read this one. I mentioned I was an international election observer. Can you imagine for a history teacher what a thrill that was? I mean, here I am, brand new Constitution, in 2014, and I'm over here observing the election. And by the way, the election here was done on paper, hand ballots, and that is the only way you can have an honest election. Remember, the Russians interfered with the American election in 2016 because of the computerized system, right? And they were successful. Nobody knows if Hillary would have won if the Russians hadn't interfered, but it's very possible. This is called At a Polling Station Somewhere in Ukraine, May 25th, 2014. On a small wooden chair, I sit and observe. I'm used to standing and participating, but I must be objective in this very subjective world. I'm in a school that reminds me of my own elementary school. It was Prospect School somewhere else on this vast planet. Here Ukrainians vote. Here I am an official international election observer. And here appeals to my ego, and this appeals to my humility. The most important election of the new millennium, the age of Aquarius. Peace and understanding will guide the planet. Not in Kyiv, not in Katrina-reeking New Orleans, not in the lethal Gulf of Mexico, not anywhere I can see. Maybe here, for this moment, on a small wooden chair, sun pouring through the window, wheat and sky, blue and gold. I am blue for the future of this country. I am gold with hope.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your book.
Okay.
For the support in Ukraine.
Yes.
Thank
And Yaku, to you too. Thank you. And again, please buy it.
I'll give a link for your profile, Facebook profile.
Oh, okay. Good. Right. And yes, thank you. Good. Slava Ukraini.